Stop. My ear is on the ground. Everyone, stop. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine, and this is Men Stuff, the podcast on man things.
Wait, Catherine, forgive me, but you're not a man.
I know, but who better to learn about man stuff than a woman?
We're bad at it.
And today, I'm interested in learning more about the 1976 movie Rocky, starring Sylvester Stallone. And guess what? You're going to help me. The person joining me today is my friend Christiaan, and he's an expert on the topic of martial arts. Hi, Christiaan.
Hello.
Christiaan and I went to college together at Radford University in Southern Virginia, and we've been friends ever since. Chris, what did you get your degree in when we were there? I can't remember.
English education.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Got mine in broadcast journalism. And if listeners, if you're thinking, oh, wow, have I seen you on the news? No, you have not. Chris is a martial arts guru. He's joining us today to give insight into this amazing film, Rocky, which I have not seen. So, Chris, tell us about just your experience with martial arts.
My experience in martial arts has actually been very heavily centered around women. My mother was my first instructor. She is a master in judo. She's a 5'6" Irish woman. She's also like a Sunday school teacher for kindergartners. So she's the living epitome of a dichotomy, but that's a whole conversation for another day with me and my therapist. But when I was about 13, I took up Taekwondo. And I've actually earned 2 different black belts in different forms of it. One in the International Taekwondo Federation, or ITF, which is more common here in the U.S., and one in the World Taekwondo, the WT, also known as Kukikwan in Korean, which is the Taekwondo brand that they use for like the Olympics and things like that. But I've studied both here in the U.S. and actually over in Korea when I lived there as a teacher. I've competed on local, state, national stages. At one international stage by accident in Korea. I didn't speak the language well enough to understand what was happening. I thought we were at like a seminar, and then someone handed me a medal at the end of it, and I had no idea what was happening. Just all I know is that they handed me a medal, and someone bought me lunch. So.
You're an international superstar there. We have the right person to give us insight into this movie. Real quick to start, just for my own knowledge, can you tell me, Rocky is, of course, a movie about boxing. What is the difference between boxing, wrestling, MMA, then Taekwondo?
Okay, I will condense this.
We'll start really simple.
No worries. So, of course, boxing is a combat sport. It was very highly popularized in Europe for a long time. A lot of countries like Ireland, for example, are really well known for having a lot of boxing championships, having it very deeply ingrained within the culture. And there's 4 different styles of it. They kind of rock, paper, scissor each other. And it took the world by storm for a long time. It was one of the most popular sports in the world for a couple of centuries, actually. It's usually broken up into 15-minute rounds, and there's a couple of different ways to win. One is by decision. So if you and I are boxing and either one of us manages to knock each other out, the judges will score our performance and determine who the winner is. Oftentimes, what many people don't know is if one of us has a higher track record than the other, the decision will often go to the person with the higher track record, which actually kind of comes up in the movie. But yeah, they also have knockout, which is when they knock you down. It can be total unconsciousness or just to the point where you're incensed and can't get up after 10 seconds, and the referee will count that. Or technical knockout, you are knocked down completely off your feet for 3 times. Because at that point, they're like, you're in really big danger of a concussion at that point. We're done. Yeah, so TKO, technical knockout. Wrestling, we're not talking about like the spectacle that is the drama of like WWE and all that good stuff. But like Greco-Roman style wrestling, like you see in high schools and colleges and the Olympics, it comes from the Greeks and the Romans. It's all on the ground, typically speaking. Like if you stand up, you're usually disqualified. Typically speaking, it's like stay on the ground. And the point is to pin your opponent, their shoulders to the mat, using your chest to press theirs down. But it is another combat sport that is also very popular. But again, not the crowd pleaser necessarily that, mainstream sports like football, baseball, things like that are. MMA kind of comes on the heels. It's a fairly recent phenomenon in the grand scheme of sports. It sort of combines the karate craze. I mean, we all know Chuck Norris, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, all these guys coming over. There was a very big push to kind of bring Eastern martial arts to the United States. And the goal is to knock your opponent out. So Taekwondo is the one I can speak with the most authority on. It is a Korean martial art. It actually is a hybrid of the traditional Korean martial art, Taekyon, and karate. Most people don't realize it's deeply, deeply, deeply rooted in Korean history because Japan actually invaded, on several occasions, did conquer Korea throughout about a millennia or two. And as a result, they began using the traditional Japanese martial arts and blending it with Korean martial arts. And one of the things that makes Taekwondo unique is it's really well known for its kicks. We call them the pretty kicks, but it's known for being very powerful in terms of making contact with those kicks. Now, I may not be the best example of that. Again, see earlier comment about being clumsy, but I do enjoy it. It is a lot of fun. And it's art you can practice solo, which is one of the reasons I enjoy it.
I really appreciate you going into all of this. And I'm seeing similarities. Last week, I chatted with my brother about the Paris to Dakar rally, and we talked about when cars were invented. And then as soon as the second car was invented, they started racing them. But before that, before that, we had men and women, people. And I've always been fascinating with the sport of fighting in general, because it is truly one of those very authentic human things to fight one person against the other.
Right.
And what you just described, it mirrored the evolution of cars, because at first cars were A to B, but then as they developed, they started having different strengths, etc. And you're talking about Taekwondo being this developed and matured and artistic form of the art with different specialties. It's very, very interesting. And also, getting back to Rocky and boxing, thank you for your insight on boxing. One other thing to talk about before we get into it, everyone, Chris and I were texting last night, and he told me this is actually a really significant day because at the time of recording, it is June 1st. And that marks the start of Pride Month. And Chris was telling me that Rocky is a really notable movie in the gay community.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct. So it came out in 1976. And during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was dangerous. I mean, outright dangerous to be a queer person in the United States. For our listeners, I am bisexual and I have a husband who's gay. So we are a interracial queer couple, me being the blazing Caucasian and him being a beautiful Puerto Rican. Just to point that out. But at the time, our marriage never would have existed. One, because marriage for two men was not legal at that time. But two, we're also interracial. And this whole concept is taboo. So we began having to really kind of look for places where we could see ourselves in Hollywood. And because the arts gave us an outlet to express ourselves, we were naturally drawn to being artists and performers and vocalists, which is why you see so many people in Broadway and Hollywood who are queer today. And that is not by accident. That was where we could, if we weren't comfortable being who we were, we could be paid to pretend to be someone else. And that was super important to our history. Rocky's significance actually goes back a little bit further. I mentioned it was the gayest thing in our texting conversation since Ben-Hur.
Yes, was the exact quote, yes.
There are so many movies like Ben-Hur, first of all, where we could really insert ourselves. And as viewers, ultimately, that's what we all do, right? We want to insert ourselves into the story. We want to see ourselves reflected. We want to empathize with how we would respond in that situation. This is why dramas and comedies and tragedies and horror, they're all so popular because we can project ourselves into them. So we had very obvious, subtle homoerotic context. Then later in the 1970s, kind of almost in response to, the hippie days and the disco days, we see these hyper masculine movies come out. You were mentioning Rocky's thighs, right? Like this super macho. This movie comes out, and of course, the first thing our community notices is there's hot muscular men on TV, right? Like that's the first thing we're going to notice. But then as you start to watch it, like this combat sport, there's a lot of homoeroticism in combat sports. And like when we look at the friendship between Rocky and Paulie and the struggle between him and Apollo at the end, the way they kind of hug it out and they embrace after beating living daylights out of each other, it becomes more of an idea of they weren't fighting each other, they were fighting something together. And that can be read as a major queer subtext. And we totally co-opted that movie. And then, of course, they came out with sequels, and it was like, oh, look, they heard us.
More.
It set off so many things. It really did. It was culturally significant to us, like being able to like project ourselves into like the struggle, the concept of struggle, and proving our value and who we are, especially during that time. Because this was right before the 1980s, where the AIDS epidemic happened, and there was very deliberate misinformation campaigns happening in order to let the queer community die. That was the goal. So anything that we could see ourselves feeling empowered and feeling strong and fighting back against the odds, we held on to that hard. Rocky was one of those movies that kind of bubbles up to the surface. Stallone has actually proven to be a pretty awesome ally, so we're like, yes, we stand. So
when there are two men fighting against each other, it's very authentic, human. It is carnal, and I have to agree with you. There is something so alluring about two humans fighting. Like whenever I'm at Buffalo Wild Wings and MMA is on, either it's male or female, there is just something enticing about it. I think no matter your sexuality, it is something just raw and carnal, and it's infatuating. The other thing I had in my notes I wanted to ask you was, who is the villain in this movie? Because, I didn't feel that Apollo and Rocky had this huge competition. It was almost like society was the villain, and Rocky was just trying to prove himself and his worth with what he had. So I love that you brought that up, because I got the same vibe.
Rocky was really ahead of its time in that regard. And I call it like we're in the post-Frozen era of like storytelling where we no longer have villains, no longer clear definition between black and white, good and evil. We're oftentimes working more of an internal struggle, and there's not really a person to be contended with. And I think Rocky exemplifies that like 40 years earlier, Because it's at no point is Rocky against another person other than, obviously in the ring, but he's against himself, and he's against society's expectations of him, or what he perceives those expectations to be.
It just makes the movie really relatable, because we have all been in a situation where someone wasn't seeing us for our full worth. I grew up with Disney princesses, and, everything went their way for the most part. They had small conflicts here and there. But I think the story of Rocky is really like he took a small step forward in a couple areas of his life, and it was just really, really relatable. Could I ever say that I could relate to a, underdog boxer growing up in Philadelphia? At first glance, no. And now here I am. So a disclaimer for you, Chris, and everyone. I don't really watch movies or TV. It's just not one of my vices. I have several, don't worry. If someone asks me, oh, have you seen blank? I have not seen blank. I do have access to the internet, so I can gather the general vibe of most movies. I have never seen Rocky up until this point. And what I knew about the film going into it was that Rocky was a boxer. There's someone in the movie named Adrian. I was texting with you on this, and thank you for not spoiling it. I do not know going in if Adrian is male or female. I have no idea. And I knew that he ran upstairs, he fought some meat, and then he yells out the name Adrian. And I did know that it took place in Philadelphia. So this is what I got. So I just want to tell you that when I was preparing for this, I had the song Maniac stuck in my head over and over because of that line, just a steel town girl on a Saturday night looking for the fight of her life. But I realized that Steel Town was Pittsburgh, but she was at the fight of her life. Rocky's at the fight of their life. They're both in Pennsylvania. So that state, I think, just has a lot of internal conflict.
And until this movie, no one knew Pennsylvania could be remotely interesting.
Rocky was profound on so many levels. Right. So getting into it, we'll just talk through the movie now. I pressed play. I got that wonderful, notable theme song. There's no credits at the beginning. There's just that song, and then the name Rocky scrolls across the screen, and then it fades into Jesus. And I'm like ready for it.
Little details like that I don't remember as well, because I saw this as a kid. I was born in 85. So like Same. This movie was high in my dad's brain He tried to raise me as manly as possible, and Rocky was required reading. So subtle details I don't remember as well. But what I do remember is him being an Italian American. Catholicism
Mm-hmm.
is super important in the movie, even though it's kind of always in the background.
Yes, yes, it's nuanced. It's great because I am watching this movie with a fine-tooth comb. And then we have your yin to my yang, where, you saw it as a kid. And so you have all of these different memories and nostalgia attached to it.
Great, because I'm going to learn some stuff today.
The plot. So the first time we see Rocky, he's taking a punch. We get the feeling that the fight is going okay, not great. Goes over to his corner and he's ignoring the advice of his coach or whoever is with him. Gets up, continues the fight, and it ends with him winning. Also, as I texted you about, the thighs of the man he is fighting are just exceptional. So
please know that we notice those thighs too in our community. Like you can hear the echo through decades. Yes.
I wish I could have seen this movie on the big screen, honestly, because that would have been amazing. Blessings. It's a great opening scene. Then what happens right after Rocky gets out of the ring just continues to solidify this movie as an amazing 80s masterpiece. Rocky's walking past a bookie who's smoking a cigarette, and Rocky says, "Hey, can I get a smoke?" And I'm already like, okay, you're a boxer, you're an athlete. I get that it's the 80s, but that's kind of surprising.
Right.
It's a little weird. But what happens after that is really weird. The bookie says, "Yes, you can have one." And he takes the half-smoked cigarette out of his own mouth, hands it to Rocky, and Rocky just takes it and starts smoking it. And then Guy just grabs another one out of his greasy hair and sticks a new one in his mouth.
Nothing homoerotic about that at all. Just two guys being guys, swapping spit.
You can smoke my cigarette. We start learning more about Rocky. He walks home. When he gets to his house, we see what his living situation is like. He lives alone. He has 2 pet turtles. He has music records hanging from the wall on some sort of clothes hanger. There's a poster of presumably his dad in the background, who's a boxer. So we get that storytelling that dad may have been a famous boxer. See that, the situation isn't super duper financially. He feeds his turtles. He tries to read the back of the turtle food and struggles. And we have a little moment where he's longingly looking at his photo of himself younger. The next day, he wakes up and he goes to the pet store. So we're seeing this infatuation with pets. When he gets there, he starts having a kind of one-sided conversation with a girl who could probably be described best as Tina from Bob's Burgers.
That is a good description, yes.
So she's ignoring him. He keeps going on. And then in a groundbreaking moment in movie history, he says Adrian for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So 9:38 p.m. on Friday, March 31st, 2024. I now know who Rocky is referring to when he says Adrian.
Yeah, it's so funny you keep mentioning you weren't sure who Adrian was, if Adrian was a boy or a girl. Because again, bringing it back to that queer history thing, that's another reason this movie. He didn't date a girl named, Michaela, Michelle, Stacy, Catherine. Adrian's an androgynous name. So we've never confirmed that Stallone was trying to give us a wink and a nod to be like, "Hey, I see you guys. You're going to be okay." But it was we take it that way.
Circumstantial evidence. I said Tina's from Bob's Burgers, but Adrian is clearly a beautiful woman who has been made to look frumpy in this scene. Chris, have you ever seen Not Another Teen Movie?
Honey, we established that I'm queer, right? Also required reading.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. So in that movie, the main character has glasses and a ponytail. And then when she gets the big makeover to be prom queen, all they do is take off her glasses and take out her ponytail. And that's the makeover. And I'm getting this vibe from Adrian, except it's a beanie and glasses. I cannot wait for these beanie and glasses to come off.
Right. And that's essentially what happens. If anybody hasn't seen the movie.
Then we keep learning about Rocky throughout his day. After the pet store, he goes and he shakes down some guys for money. So we see that he's a debt collector and he uses his muscle for that. Then he goes to the gym. There's a little bit of drama there. His coach won't give him the time of day. His locker is given to another boxer. He confronts the coach. They have a little bit of a back and forth. And in this coach back and forth, the coach calls him a tomato. And I thought that was a really specific insult, Chris. What does it mean?
In the lifting community, we often refer to other people as tomatoes if they hold their breath while they're lifting. Their head turns really red. But it could also just be, I mean, we've seen mafia movies, right? For lack of better words, he's working for the legalized mafia. And as a debt collector, shaking people down. That's essentially what he's doing, which is one of the things he's at odds with because he's deeply unhappy with that. And I can't help but wonder if you tomato, maybe that's because random pseudo mafia isms. Like, I'm going to hit you right in the good neighbor morning. How are you? You know?
And you are right. I did notice that this movie had a PG rating. Also in this scene, you probably don't remember this watching it as a child, but I noticed that the makeup department gave this coach a fake cauliflower ear. And I just found that attention to detail exceptional.
That's a good detail, which is funny because you tend to see it more with wrestlers than you do with boxers these days for some reason.
80s directors were just like, just throw it in there. Let's really sell it. It's not enough that we're at a boxing gym with people actively training and we saw Rocky boxing. We need to sell it harder.
What if it came off at any point during production? There's a blooper reel of that ear falling off somewhere.
Stop. My ear is on the ground. Everyone stop. So that evening, after this confrontation, Rocky goes back to the pet store. He sees Adrian for some comfort. He's still just talking at her. I have no idea if she likes him. I can't figure it out. And then Rocky starts talking to the birds and joking with them. Friday, May 31st at 9:55 p.m., Catherine falls in love with Rocky. Oh my gosh, he's down on his luck, muscular brute hitman, soft spot for animals, and making little jokes with the birds like, hey, you guys want to fly me home? I did not expect to fall in love while preparing for this podcast, Chris, but here we are.
It's so endearing.
I've only really ever known Sylvester Stallone as an adult, so seeing him as a young man like this was very different. And I've only kind of known him as people making fun of him. Like, sorry, that just was our generation. I was just very taken off guard by how charming he was. I'm starting to see why this movie is so popular with all different crowds. Rocky goes to talk to Adrian's brother, who is also Rocky's friend. And Rocky's upset that his strategy of going by and telling Adrian jokes 2 times a day isn't working. And then he laments about it. And this brother, we meet him. He's got a mega bald spot, beard gut, and is combing his remaining hair in the shard of a mirror. And he delivers some feedback that Adrian's a loser. She's pushing 30. And if she doesn't watch out, she's going to die alone.
The whole point about Polly is he's a foil for Rocky. Because Rocky's this physically tough specimen. You know, he's the quintessential tough guy, right? Like, he's extremely athletic. He's mastered a fighting sport. He uses this to make money on the side, working for the legal mafia. Whereas Polly, is a shrewd businessman, but he's also, physically speaking, the man's a 4 out of 10. Let's be honest, and that's on his best day. Like, he's a 4 out of 10. But he's a foil for Rocky because not just physically, but his personality is such the opposite. Because Rocky is so genuine. At no point does he pretend to be anything he's not. Whereas Polly, I never feel like at any point we get a sense of who Polly really is because everything with him is a front. And one of the ways he fronts is he tries to influence or manipulate what's happening around him. And in some cases, like with Adrian, it's to make sure she knows he thinks that she's below him and that everyone else thinks that too. And that's a defensive mechanism of people who are narcissistic. So he and Rocky, they're best friends, but it's a very toxic friendship for the most part. I don't mean that I like Polly. So we're clear, because he's gross. I didn't like him as a kid.
It's insightful, and looking at it with that adult lens is important for sure. So she's pushing 30. If she doesn't watch out, she's going to die alone. So I assume that this man thinks that we die at 31 or 32. I'm not sure.
It's a very queer attitude. So we're all clear on that.
Yes. It's like Cinderella. If you don't find your glass husband by midnight or 30, then you just die. So I paused the movie at this point to write down my commentary because I thought that Paulie was done, but he wasn't. Then he chases Rocky through a restaurant to make sure he points out that his sister is dried up and her body was going to dry up. So thank you, Dr. Brother. Maybe it's a thing where he is disappointed his sister didn't do more with her life and he doesn't want his friend to settle. It's nuanced if it's there, but
I truly think it's because he was jealous. I think he didn't want Rocky spending time on Adrian. I think he wanted Rocky to himself, and I don't think he had the wherewithal to understand why he felt that way.
Yes. Jealousy is one of those emotions that shows up in so many different ways. If I'm angry, I can say, I identify that I'm angry, but it's hard. When you're jealous, you just hate someone for no reason.
That's what we do.
Then we cut to a scene where we meet Apollo Creed for the first time, and he's planning his big bicentennial match for the heavyweight world title. And what I have to say about this, Apollo Creed is Chubbs from Happy Gilmore. And
Yep.
I am so happy, and they're basically the same, which makes it even better. Apollo Creed's first opponent is not available due to injury, so he has to find another person to fight. And how does he do that? Well, Apollo Creed is reading through a book of some kind that's about 600 pages long. It has the thickness of a dictionary, and apparently it's a book of current boxers. So, Chris, how often is this book published?
Thought on that would be it's probably updated annually or every other year, honestly, because they used to have that. Like they would have registered boxers and things like that, and people would use them to lay bets, place odds, all that good stuff. It was really for betting and gambling more than anything.
I am impressed that is not a joke, and it's really that would be how you'd find a competitor.
That book would not be available on the corner market or at Barnes and Noble, most likely, but it is published through a publisher, and it's usually through a boxing league. Like they would have an in-house publisher, and you can get it from them.
Wow. So he's rejecting everyone until he finds Rocky's page. Apollo Creed selects him, and the fight is going to be Apollo Creed versus the Italian Stallion, and the plot is starting to firm up. Another confession from me, I thought that Rocky was the character's nickname, but that wasn't his real name. But now I'm learning that the Italian Stallion is his nickname, and Rocky is actually his real name given at birth.
So, there's a Blue Ivy, there's a Northwest. Why not Rocky?
Oh yeah, an apple. We cannot forget little Apple. Got it. And Dad was a celebrity boxer, so that makes sense.
There was actually a Power Ranger named Rocky in the 90s. I can point that out, played by Stephen Cardenas.
There was a Power Ranger named Rocky. Was it the red one?
It was the second red one, yeah, and he grew up to, I don't know if you watched the most recent thing they did where they all came back for like a reunion show, but oh my lord, he grew up to be daddy. And of course they send him in dressed as a fireman.
Oh, can we make this better? Okay, so the plot continues, and we learn that Adrian's brother is equally horrible to Adrian, directly to her face, not only behind her back. He brings Rocky home on Thanksgiving and makes her go on a date with him, does not care she's in the middle of making Thanksgiving dinner. He is very emotionally unstable. However, underneath that was a bro move. Like, you're going on a date with him no matter what right now. So
Adrian's a great character, and the way she's treated in the movie is it problematic? Because is it showing her as being docile, or is it showing what a problematic character Polly is? Are we calling out the toxic masculinity there?
I'm glad you said that, because she does seem to thrive when she starts dating Rocky and gets out of that living situation. Her wardrobe changes. You get the impression that her self-confidence has improved greatly, and she starts standing up for herself. It's like, where did that come from? Was it because he was smothering her? Was Rocky a better influence? Who knows?
And there's not a lot of women in the movie. I don't think we ever have her interact with another woman, do we?
When we first meet her, there's another woman who works at the pet shop. And that's the only other woman I can think of in the entire film.
Completely forgot about Pet Shop Girl, because it's like, wow, poor thing. So it brings that question. Does she grow of her own volition? Does this demonstrate what a villain Polly is? Or is she just there to show us how good Rocky is? So, bless her heart, she's just a plot device.
True, she is, but an adorable one.
I feel like we got to track her growth pretty easily. She pulled that off well.
She pulled it off very well. And I did just remember one other female character. The journalist was a female when she was interviewing Rocky among the meat.
Oh.
So they go on a date due to Polly's insistence. They ice skate, and Adrian says a few more words. So her dialogue is picking up.
Mm-hmm.
They go for a walk outside. He has a little bit of a Rodney Dangerfield shtick. He said, like, hey, I'm dumb and you're shy. What kind of coconuts are we, eh? He's kind of like Danny Zuko mixed with Rodney Dangerfield. I'm eating it up.
That is a really cute line because he's self-aware.
Yeah, he's self-deprecating and smooth. Brilliant.
One thing I always loved about that scene is he never seems to ridicule her for being shy. And he's openly admitting that she's smarter than he is. He never tells her, you have to open up. Why aren't you more extroverted? It's like, hey, I have trouble reading at a 3rd grade level, and you're shy. This will work.
This will work. How many dates have I been on where the guy tries to prove to me that he's smarter than me as part of his personality? You've just identified why I'm so in love with Rocky. He's just no ego. Too bad he doesn't really exist.
Right. We need to find Joe Rocky.
I appreciate you. They arrive at his place. He invites her in with a very sensuous and tempting line of, there are very rare animals inside. Whoa.
Yes.
A trouser snake, for sure. And then she says no way too many times before agreeing to come in. And it's a bit of a youch. Yeah. I think Rocky might have taught us that no means yes.
Right. That was very much a thing at the time. It was dating itself pretty hard there. We know better now.
Yes. In the context of the movie, it's presented as very charming because we know he has a heart of gold and the viewer likes him. And the viewer also kind of feels like she should open up.
Right.
But I did get just a little uncomfortable how long that scene went on. All good. She agrees. They go into the house. He is such a gentleman and offers her a nice selection of soda, donuts, cupcakes, or chocolate. And then he starts taking his clothes off because it's so hot in there. So this guy really has some moves. He offered donuts and chocolate. It's too hot, so he must remove his shirt. He takes one of his records off the wall and puts it on and starts playing some music. And he introduces her to his pets. I mean, my pants are coming off at this point.
I'd be right there with you. One thing I noticed in that scene was at no point did he try to get her drunk. And that was refreshing, especially for that time period. He never was like, here's wine, here's beer. So at all times, she still had her full faculties about her. And while there are a lot of cringy moments, that part I appreciated.
Even though he was persistent, he didn't do anything to take away her ability to make a decision. Continuing on Sylvester Stallone's charm, there was something that I noticed. During this scene, there's one part where Adrian's resisting his come-ons and they're talking face to face. And the actress is actually turning red. She's blushing. Sylvester Stallone's charm is so powerful that you can see this girl flush throughout the scene. So I'm not the only one who's feeling this here. Poor girl. The glasses and the beanie come off. Woo! And huge surprise, she's gorgeous. Then he offers her a really great deal, which is that he's going to kiss her, but she doesn't have to kiss him back, which is totally a precursor to just the tip, which I'm sure they probably played, but we don't get to see. And they make out, fall to the floor, and passionately kiss as the scene exits. It worked. Yeah, Sly's got it.
You know, the other thing about that too is he had her consent before he kissed her. Like, he didn't. Maybe it was not the enthusiastic consent that we want today, but at no point did he put his hands on her without her permission first. And I'm like, go ahead, Sylvester. Cringe scene aside, you knew how to treat a lady. Okay.
He didn't do anything without her agreeing to it. Even when she went into the house, he did prop the door open and walk away from the threshold. So she could have walked off. It is a little cat and mouse. After that, after the night of who knows what, Rocky gets called into Apollo Creed's manager's office. I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I paused the movie to see how far in we were because I got a little wrapped up in the love story.
Right.
So in this 2-hour movie, we've spent 1 hour building Rocky's backstory, and then Chubbs Creed was in it for about 3 minutes. And I forgot about the boxing part of the movie and got invested in everything else. We're an hour into the movie. We've just learned that Rocky has agreed to this world heavyweight title fight against Apollo Creed. And Chris, I have bad news. We're going to have to pick this up in Rocky Part 2 next week.
I think I'll be okay because that means I get to talk about it again. So that works for me.
Perfect. So everyone, stay tuned. This movie has too much plot, and we've gotten way too deep into it to contain it to one episode. So we will pick this up in Rocky Part 2 very soon. Thank you, Chris, for your insight, and we'll keep talking about this soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
If you like what you are hearing and you want to stay connected, there are a few ways you can do that. We are on Instagram at Men Stuff Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon on patreon.com/menstuffpodcasts. And if you have feedback, questions, or topic suggestions, or you just want to say hi, you can email us at menstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Of course, the quickest way to stay in touch with us is to subscribe to us on your platform of choice. And of course, I'd love for you to leave a 5-star review and tell your friends. Despite the name, Men Stuff is a podcast designed for everyone. Our choice of title is not meant to exclude or discriminate against any gender or identity. Instead, it's a playful nod to the diversity of topics we explore and the perspectives we invite. The creator of Men Stuff, Catherine, is a woman who embraces the irony of leading a podcast with such a title. Her aim is to foster open and inclusive conversations that resonate with everyone, regardless of gender. So whether you identify as male, female, non-binary, or anywhere in between, you are welcome and your insight matters. Thanks for listening.